The signal came as a faint whisper through the vastness of space, barely detectable against the usual hum of cosmic radiation. On a small, heavily monitored station at the edge of human-controlled space, a communications officer noticed the unusual blip. At first it seemed like static interference, the kind that technicians often ignored. But as the signal repeated itself, patterns began to emerge: an organized pulse, a series of strange symbols, and a tone that carried a desperate urgency. Whoever or whatever was sending it was in danger. It was not a routine distress beacon. This was a cry for help, a call from the edge of extinction. And the weight of it pressed on the officers in the room like a physical force. Analysts rushed to interpret the message, feeding it through the fastest decryptors and artificial intelligence translators available. The SOS was almost incomprehensible at first. The language, though alien, contained the same raw emotion as any human distress call. Fear, hopelessness, and a plea for intervention threaded every pulse of data. It spoke of cities burning, of armies overwhelming them with a ferocity that was almost unimaginable. Families had no time to flee. The colony's defenses were collapsing. The voice of the signal carried not just the technical data of a dying colony, but the story of lives being torn apart. In the observation room, officers exchanged uneasy glances. Such SOS messages were not unusual in the galaxy, but most often they came from worlds that were already at the brink. Worlds too far away or too insignificant for immediate intervention. Usually larger civilizations debated endlessly, discussing risks, resources, and political consequences. But Earth, known across the stars as the Death World, had a reputation for decisiveness, for acting with swift and overwhelming force when the stakes were high. Even so, the urgency in this particular signal was different. There was no time for delay or hesitation. As the analysts worked, the details began to emerge. The colony was located on a remote planet in a star system that was almost completely unknown to human explorers. Its inhabitants were an alien species who had lived peacefully for generations, cultivating their cities and technology, unaware of the dangers lurking in the galaxy. The invading force was described as brutal, technologically advanced, and utterly relentless. Nothing in the record suggested that this species had ever faced serious resistance. The message painted a horrifying picture. Entire populations were being massacred, entire cities wiped off the maps, and the colony's leaders were powerless to stop the onslaught. The higher command received the reports immediately. There was a moment of silence as they absorbed the reality of the situation. Earth's leaders had dealt with dangerous situations before, but the stakes here were unusual. This was not just a matter of strategy or politics. It was a moral and existential choice. To intervene meant sending forces into unknown territory, risking human lives and possibly sparking wider conflicts. To ignore the plea meant watching countless innocent lives vanish. The decision weighed heavily, but history had already taught them one lesson. Hesitation often invited disaster, and humans were not known for waiting quietly when action was required. The situation on the colony continued to worsen even as the message reached human ears. Each pulse of the SOS revealed more devastation. Entire sectors of the colony were engulfed in flames, structures crumbling under assault. Alien soldiers, organized, merciless, and driven by motives unknown, swept through streets that had once been vibrant and full of life. Families huddled in shelters, praying for rescue that might never arrive. Children clutched their parents in terror, their eyes wide with disbelief as explosions shook the ground beneath them. For the first time, the Deathworlders on Earth could fully comprehend the scale of the nightmare unfolding. Years away, Admiral Soren Hale, a seasoned commander with decades of experience in interstellar strategy and combat, was briefed in He studied the transmission, noting the raw emotion embedded in the SOS and the technical details of the colony's destruction. Hale's mind raced through possibilities. Could they reach the colony in time? What level of force would be needed to halt the invaders? Were there any hidden dangers? He knew that any delay could be fatal. Every second counted. For the first time in weeks, he felt the familiar thrill of a mission that demanded not just precision, but ruthlessness. The analysts continued to translate and decode. They pieced together fragments of the SOS, reconstructing the timeline of events. The invaders had arrived suddenly, moving faster than anyone expected. The colony's defenses, though sophisticated in their own right, were no match for the attackers. Resistance had been valiant but futile. The SOS revealed personal stories, messages from parents to children, from leaders to their citizens, from friends to one another, each conveying the unbearable reality of life under siege. It was a window into a world that was disappearing before their eyes, a stark reminder that in the galaxy, survival was never guaranteed. The people monitoring the transmission felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. Fear, because the scale of destruction was terrifying and because no one could predict the true nature of the invaders. Determination, because humans had always responded to danger with a unique combination of strategy, resilience, and force. Unlike other civilizations, which often debated endlessly, humans were decisive. If a threat demanded a response, they acted, and they acted with efficiency and ruthlessness. The SOS from the colony had triggered that instinct, igniting a fire in the hearts of those responsible for Earth's response. Back on the colony, The survivors did not know that help was coming. They could only continue their desperate attempts to survive, dodging attacks and trying to maintain some semblance of order. The SOS was sent repeatedly, each transmission a pulse of hope into the void. They had no guarantee that anyone would respond. In a galaxy filled with indifferent civilizations, help was rare. Most of the time, the weak were left to perish, their stories never reaching beyond the stars. But somehow this SOS had caught the attention of Earth, the planet known for producing warriors shaped by one of the deadliest worlds in human history, in Earth's command center. Decisions were made swiftly. The SOS had been verified, its details analyzed, and the threat confirmed. A consensus emerged almost instantly. A response was required. There was no room for discussion about politics, alliances, or risk calculations. The colony's lives depended on immediate action, and humans were uniquely capable of delivering that action with a speed and decisiveness unmatched in the galaxy. The decision marked the beginning of an operation that would test every skill, technology, and strategy humans had honed over centuries of surviving and thriving in harsh conditions as the human fleet prepared for deployment. The SOS continued to pulse across space, a lifeline for those trapped on the colony. Every message carried a piece of the colony's story, a testament to their courage and desperation. For the humans reading it, the transmission became more than a distress signal. It became a call to arms, a moral imperative that demanded a response. Admiral Hale and his officers understood the stakes. Failure was not an option, and the cost of inaction was too great. The faint whisper from the edge of human space had triggered a chain of events that would forever change the lives of those involved, both on the colony and among the Deathworlders. In the final moments before the fleet's launch, the reality of the SOS settled over everyone involved. The galaxy was vast, filled with unknown dangers and unpredictable forces, yet this one call had reached Earth and demanded a response. It was a reminder that even in the most distant corners of space, connections could be made, and help could arrive where it seemed impossible. For the humans preparing to answer the call, the mission was clear. They would reach the colony, confront the invaders, and ensure that no plea for help went unanswered. The faint signal continued to pulse, carrying hope, fear, and desperation across the void. And as Earth's fleet accelerated toward the colony, ready to unleash the full force of the Deathworlders, a single truth became undeniable when humanity decided to act. The universe itself would feel the consequences. Asterisk. As soon as the SOS had been fully analyzed and confirmed, Earth's command center erupted into controlled chaos. Screens flickered with real-time data, tracking the colony's situation light years away. Each officer and analyst moved quickly, relaying information, running simulations, and calculating possible outcomes. Time was not on their side. The colony's coordinates were distant and remote, tucked in a star system that few humans had explored in depth. Even light-speed communications had delays, but every second mattered. On this day, hesitation could cost thousands of lives, perhaps even entire civilizations. Admiral Soren Hale stood at the center of the command deck, his sharp eyes scanning the displays. Years of experience had taught him that responding to a threat like this required not only force but precision and planning. He understood that the fleet he commanded was unlike any other in human history. The ships were designed to survive extreme conditions, with armor capable of withstanding attacks that would destroy most other vessels. Each crew member was trained to operate in the harshest environments, from freezing vacuum of deep space to the gravity-crushing surfaces of alien worlds. Hale knew that this mission demanded everything humans had perfected: strategy, strength, and ruthless efficiency. As the fleet prepared, engineers worked tirelessly in massive docking bays. Every ship was being armed, tested, and loaded with supplies for a long-range strike. Weapons systems glinted under harsh artificial light, from pulse cannons that could vaporize enemy ships in seconds to missile arrays designed to strike planetary surfaces with pinpoint accuracy. Human soldiers were already in stasis pods, ready to awaken at a moment's notice. These were no ordinary troops. They were Deathworlders shaped by the most hostile planet in known human history, trained to survive, adapt, and conquer any threat. Their presence alone sent fear through any civilization that dared to oppose them. The atmosphere in the command center was tense but purposeful. Analysts monitored the invaders' movements, estimating the size of their forces, their technological capabilities, and their likely tactics. Most civilizations in the galaxy would hesitate, debating endlessly about risk versus reward. They might have considered political repercussions, trade agreements, or alliances. But humans were different. When lives were at stake, Earth acted decisively. There was no time for debates or committees. The mission was clear: reach the colony, protect its inhabitants, and neutralize the threat. Failure was not an option. Every officer involved felt the weight of the decision. The SOS had humanized the alien colony, making the distant world more than just another point on a star map. Analysts had read through the raw data and intercepted fragments of the colony's own communications. Families had been sending messages, desperate for rescue. Leaders had been coordinating defenses, fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. Children's voices had been picked up in the transmission, faint but full of fear. The urgency of these lives pushed every member of Earth's command to act with unmatched speed. As the preparations continued, the fleet's movements were carefully synchronized. Ships formed squadrons, each with a specific role. Some would act as frontline attackers, engaging enemy ships directly. Others would provide support, deploying shield generators, intercepting missiles, and maintaining communications. Recon drones were sent ahead, scanning for ambushes or hidden threats. Every detail was calculated, every contingency accounted for. The Deathworlders had learned over centuries that in war, preparation was the difference between victory and annihilation. This mission would test that principle to its limits. On board the flagship, Admiral Hale addressed his officers. His voice was calm, steady, and commanding, the kind of presence that inspires confidence even in the most dire circumstances. He reminded them that the SOS represented not only a distant colony but a moral obligation. The people on that planet were vulnerable, and it was humanity's choice to intervene. He spoke of strategy, of coordination, of the precision required for the fleet to succeed. He reminded them that speed and ruthlessness would be their greatest assets. Hesitation could lead to disaster, and humanity could not afford it. The human crews responded with quiet determination. Many had trained their entire lives for situations like this, missions into unknown space, facing enemies that were stronger, faster, or more numerous. They knew the stories of previous Deathworlder operations, victories where humans had seemed unstoppable, defeating enemies who had thought themselves invincible. They knew that this mission would test every skill they had learned. As the ships powered up their engines and weapons systems, the crews felt a mixture of adrenaline, fear, and unshakable focus. Back on Earth, political leaders monitored the situation with a mix of awe and anxiety. The decision to send the fleet was controversial, but it had already been made. Discussions of alliances, trade consequences, and diplomatic fallout were secondary to the immediate need to save lives. Earth's reputation as a Deathworlder civilization was well known throughout the galaxy. Humans were survivors, fighters, and protectors when they chose to be. But their interventions were not gentle. They were decisive, brutal, and overwhelming. To those waiting in the colonies, this meant hope. To those who opposed humanity, it meant fear. The fleet finally began its departure. One by one, massive ships powered their engines, breaking free from Earth's orbit and accelerating into deep space. The departure was swift, almost silent to those watching from the planet below. The ships carried everything necessary for a long-range assault: soldiers, weapons, fuel, and supplies for sustained operations. Each vessel was a fortress, a weapon, and a home for the humans aboard. They moved with a singular purpose, a deadly combination of precision and speed that few civilizations could match. As they traveled through space, communications officers continued to monitor the SOS. The distress signal had not stopped. It was still pulsing, sending fragments of the colony's struggle into the void. Every pulse reminded the fleet of the urgency of their mission. The fleet's course was plotted to minimize travel time, using every shortcut and strategy available to reduce the distance to the endangered planet. The crew spent these hours in preparation, running simulations, checking systems, and mentally preparing for the battle to come. Every member knew that they were not just responding to a call for help, they were bringing humanity's full force to bear in a fight where the stakes were the survival of an entire civilization. Throughout the journey, analysts and commanders observed the colony's status. The invaders had not slowed down. If anything, their attacks intensified as they sensed the approaching fleet. Entire districts were under siege, and the colony's defenders were being pushed to the brink. The SOS messages revealed the desperation of those trapped below. Some had been forced into hiding, while others attempted to organize makeshift defenses. Every fragment of information fueled the determination of the fleet to reach their destination quickly. The humans knew that every second counted, and the scale of destruction awaiting them demanded immediate and overwhelming action. The fleet's journey also served as a reminder of humanity's unique nature. Unlike other civilizations that might have debated endlessly or avoided direct confrontation, humans acted with speed, decisiveness, and calculated aggression. The fleet represented centuries of adaptation to a harsh and dangerous home planet, where survival often required quick thinking, relentless training, and an acceptance of ruthless efficiency. This mission was an extension of that legacy. As the ships raced toward the colony, every soldier, engineer, and officer understood that they were the embodiment of humanity's willingness to intervene where others would hesitate. By the time the fleet approached the outer edges of the colony's system, tension reached its peak. The ships moved in formation, ready to engage immediately. Sensors detected the invaders' positions, numbers, and technology. The preparations, the months of training, the rapid mobilization of the fleet, all of it led to this moment. The SOS, faint and desperate at first, had guided them across light years of space. Now, the humans were almost within striking distance, ready to answer the call with the full force of their ruthlessness. The crew understood what was at stake. The colony's survival depended on their speed, coordination, and willingness to use overwhelming force. Each pulse of the SOS reminded them of the lives waiting to be saved, the families trapped in fear, and the future of a civilization hanging by a thread. There was no room for hesitation, no room for mistakes. Every member of the fleet carried the weight of the colony's hope and humanity's reputation. As the Deathworlders prepared for the first engagement, they reflected on what had brought them here. The SOS had been more than a signal. It had been a test of humanity's readiness to act in a crisis. And as the fleet entered the final phase of its approach, a single truth was clear: when humans decided to respond, they did so with a level of ruthlessness and efficiency that few civilizations could imagine. The SOS had summoned them, and they were ready to unleash the full power of the Deathworlders to protect the innocent and confront the threat head-on. The human fleet emerged from the folds of hyperspace like a shadow cast across the stars as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The sight that greeted Admiral Soren Hale and his officers was horrifying yet familiar. The colony was in chaos. Flames streaked across cityscapes, smoke twisted into the sky, and the once bustling streets were littered with debris. Buildings that had been home to thousands now lay in ruins, shattered by relentless attacks. Sensors reported the invaders' positions, movement patterns, and firepower. Their forces were extensive, coordinated, and determined. But Halley and his team did not flinch. This was what they had trained for. This was what the Deathworlders existed for: responding when others faltered, stepping into the void where hope seemed lost. From orbit, the colony was a map of desperation. Emergency beacons blinked intermittently, some still active, others extinguished by explosions or interference. The invaders moved with brutal efficiency, sweeping through districts, eliminating resistance, and crushing morale. For those trapped on the ground, each passing second was a matter of life or death. Families ran through the rubble, children clinging to their parents' hands, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The humans, despite being so far away, could sense the panic emanating from the SOS that continued to pulse from the colony. Every faint signal carried pieces of a story filled with fear, sorrow, and courage. It was not just a call for rescue, it was a call to action, a demand that the humans bring their ruthless precision to save lives. Hale issued his first orders with calm authority. Ships deployed into tactical formations, each squadron assigned a sector of space and a role in the upcoming assault. The main attack fleet positioned itself between the colony and the advancing invaders, ready to engage directly. Support units moved into orbital positions to provide shields and intercept incoming projectiles. Recon drones darted ahead, scanning every corner of the battlefield, feeding real-time data to command centers aboard the flagship. Every maneuver was calculated, every potential threat considered. The Deathworlders were known for their ruthlessness, but it was tempered with extraordinary precision. They did not act recklessly, they acted decisively. As the fleet prepared, humans on the ground began to notice the change in the skies. Shadows of massive warships eclipsed stars, their size and number creating awe and fear. Survivors of the colony paused in the midst of fleeing or hiding, staring at the ships descending from orbit. Some cried out in disbelief, others in hope. For those who had lost everything, the arrival of the humans felt like salvation incarnate. They had almost given up, certain that their world would fall completely into the hands of the invaders. And yet here were saviors arriving with overwhelming power. It was a sight no one in the colony would ever forget. Then the first engagement began. The invaders, sensing the humans' presence, attempted to reorganize, forming defensive lines and firing upon the approaching fleet. Energy blasts streaked across the void, colliding with human shields, some absorbed, others redirected. The humans, however, moved like a living weapon. Attack vectors were calculated, weapons fired with pinpoint accuracy, and countermeasures deployed in perfect synchronization. Every move the invaders made was anticipated and countered. They had never faced an opponent so relentless, so unyielding. Each human warship acted as part of a larger organism, striking with surgical precision and ruthless efficiency. From the colony's perspective, the battle was surreal. The air trembled with the distant sounds of explosions and energy discharges, even though most occurred in orbit. The invaders had fought the colony with fire and force, but now they faced an opponent who did not hesitate, who did not falter, who struck with unrelenting speed. Families watched from hidden shelters as massive explosions tore through the attackers' formations, ships disintegrating in bursts of light. It was terrifying and awe-inspiring at the same time. For the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. On the ground, the invaders tried to rally. They had expected resistance, but not this. The humans' orbital assault disrupted their supply lines, destroyed critical weapon installations, and left their troops vulnerable. Panic spread among the attackers, confusion taking the place of their earlier confidence. They had been the hunters, but now they were being hunted by a force far greater than anything they had faced before. The Deathworlders had come not just to defend, but to dominate the battlefield. Every strike, every move, was designed to protect the colony while inflicting maximum damage on the invaders. Admiral Hale coordinated every detail from the flagship, issuing orders with calm precision. He knew that the humans could not afford to waste time. Each moment spent maneuvering instead of attacking could cost lives below. He monitored every squadron, directing forces where they were needed most. Orbital artillery targeted enemy strongholds with surgical accuracy, while boarding units prepared to neutralize any invader ships that broke through. The coordination between orbital forces and ground operations created a seamless and overwhelming response. It was as if the fleet and the colony had become one, working in tandem to repel the attackers. The survivors on the colony began to notice changes in the battlefield. Enemy patrols that had once swept through streets vanished under orbital strikes. Key positions once held by the invaders were now abandoned, leaving the colony's people with a fragile but growing sense of relief. Children began to emerge from hiding places, cautiously peeking at the sky where human ships hovered. Leaders and remaining defenders started to organize. Inspired by the humans' precision and power, they could now act, not just survive. The Deathworlders' arrival had transformed the impossible fight for survival into a battle where hope could exist. Still, the battle was far from over. The invaders, desperate and ruthless, attempted to regroup, launching counterattacks and focusing on the most vulnerable points of the humans' formation. But the humans anticipated these moves. Every pattern of attack, every strategy the invaders employed, was countered with speed and accuracy. Human warships moved as though guided by a single consciousness, predicting the enemy's maneuvers and adapting instantly. Missile arrays, energy cannons, and drone swarms struck with devastating precision, leaving little room for the attackers to recover. The Deathworlders were not just fighting, they were orchestrating a symphony of destruction designed to protect the innocent and eliminate threats efficiently. Amidst this chaos, the human soldiers stationed on the fleet's dropships prepared for deployment. They would descend to the planet's surface to assist the remaining defenders and evacuate survivors if necessary. These troops were elite, trained to operate under extreme stress, in hostile environments, and against enemies far superior in number or technology. Their arrival would ensure that the colony could be secured completely, that no survivors would be left behind, and that the invaders would face a force they could not hope to match. The combination of orbital might and ground intervention was designed to overwhelm any resistance. The invaders, realizing they were being outmatched, began to retreat in scattered formations. But their retreat was slow, chaotic, and punished at every turn. Human forces pursued relentlessly, striking with precision to prevent regrouping. The battle was transforming from a siege into a decisive engagement, where victory was no longer uncertain. The survivors on the ground watched as the tides of battle shifted, their disbelief giving way to cautious optimism. It was still dangerous, still terrifying, but now there was a fighting chance. Throughout the operation, the SOS continued to guide human actions. It had initially been a faint cry from across the stars, almost imperceptible. Now it had become a roadmap, providing crucial information about where the most desperate survivors were, where the invaders had concentrated their forces, and where human intervention would make the greatest difference. The SOS, combined with human strategy and ruthlessness, ensured that every action taken had maximum effect. Lives were being saved, and the invaders were being systematically dismantled. By the end of the initial orbital engagement, the colony had changed dramatically. Key areas were cleared of enemy forces, critical infrastructure remained intact, and survivors were able to begin organizing again. Human forces had not only repelled the attackers but had set the stage for a complete reclamation of the colony. The Deathworlders' presence had shifted the balance entirely, transforming despair into hope and chaos into structured defense. For the first time in days, the colony's people could breathe, even as they continued to fear the remaining pockets of resistance. Admiral Hale surveyed the battlefield from the flagship. The destruction wrought upon the invaders was extensive but precise. Human losses had been minimal due to careful planning, advanced technology, and the sheer ruthlessness with which they struck. The mission had already demonstrated the full might of the Deathworlders, showing not just power, but discipline and coordination unlike anything the invaders had encountered before. The humans had arrived not just as saviors but as an unstoppable force that would reshape the way the galaxy viewed conflict and intervention. As the orbital battle drew to a temporary pause, preparations began for the next phase. Ground teams would deploy to rescue survivors, eliminate remaining threats, and stabilize the colony. The humans understood that orbital dominance was only part of the solution. To secure the colony fully, they needed boots on the ground. The survivors, who had hidden for days in fear of death, now glimpsed the humans' ships descending, ready to provide protection and relief. Hope was no longer a distant dream, it was arriving in massive, unstoppable waves. The impact of the Deathworlders' arrival was felt not only on the colony but across the galaxy. Word would spread of a civilization that responded to a distant SOS with overwhelming force, demonstrating both the ruthlessness and the precision that had earned humanity its fearsome reputation. For those waiting in the shadows, the message was clear when humans decided to intervene. They did so with unmatched efficiency and unstoppable power. The battle had reached a point where hesitation was no longer an option. The humans in orbit had neutralized the bulk of the enemy fleet, but the invaders still held pockets of resistance, determined to fight to the last. They believed that fear, numbers, and desperation could turn the tide, but they had not anticipated the humans' ruthless efficiency. Each human warship moved as if guided by a single mind, anticipating enemy maneuvers and responding with precision strikes. Every attack, every defensive action, was part of a larger plan. a plan designed to eliminate the threat completely while protecting the survivors on the colony below. Admiral Hale observed the battlefield from the flagship's command bridge. His eyes scanned screens filled with the chaos of combat, explosions erupting in space, enemy formations breaking apart, and human ships moving seamlessly in coordinated waves. He was calm, yet inside, a storm of strategic calculations churned. He knew that the invaders were dangerous, but their tactics were predictable to a mind trained to understand war in its purest form. Hale's decisions were fast, deliberate, and unforgiving. Any hesitation could allow the enemy to regroup, and the lives of thousands still trapped on the colony depended on his choices. The humans launched a series of simultaneous attacks that left the invaders no room to breathe. Orbital bombardments targeted enemy command centers, communications hubs, and supply lines. Each strike was calculated to disable the enemy's ability to coordinate, to leave them fractured and disorganized. Missile swarms tore through enemy ships like a storm of metal and fire, while energy cannons struck with unerring accuracy. The invaders tried to adapt, but each adjustment was met with another wave of human precision attacks. The battlefield became a place where humans dictated every move, controlling space with a ruthless but calculated hand. On the surface of the colony, the survivors could only watch in awe and disbelief. The skies were alive with the flashes of energy, the roar of engines, and the destruction of the invaders' forces. For them, the humans were no longer just saviors, they were an unstoppable force of nature. Parents shielded their children, who stared wide-eyed at the spectacle unfolding above. Entire neighborhoods had been abandoned, but the remaining inhabitants could feel the shift. The invaders' dominance, once absolute, was now being shattered by the humans' relentless assault. Hope began to seep back into hearts that had long been broken by fear and despair. Admiral Hale issued orders for the next stage of the operation. Ground insertion. Dropships carrying elite Deathworlder soldiers deployed from orbit, piercing the atmosphere and descending toward the colony's surface. These troops were trained to operate under extreme stress, in environments hostile and unpredictable. Their mission was to secure key locations, evacuate survivors, and eliminate any remaining pockets of resistance. Every move was synchronized with orbital attacks to ensure maximum effect. The humans had mastered the art of coordinated warfare, blending orbital superiority with ground precision, to create a total force that the enemy could neither escape nor counter. The invaders, now realizing the true scale of the humans' assault, attempted desperate maneuvers. They sent small fleets to flank the human forces, hoping to divert attention or reclaim lost territory. But the humans anticipated these moves. Patrols intercepted the flanking groups before they could reach their targets, neutralizing them with lethal efficiency. Every engagement was swift and decisive. The invaders were being dismantled piece by piece, their morale collapsing with each failure. The human approach was ruthless, calculated, and devastating, leaving no opportunity for recovery. On the colony's ground, the impact of the human forces was immediate and profound. Streets once controlled by the invaders were now cleared. Key buildings, including hospitals, command centers, and communication hubs, were secured by Deathworlder soldiers. Civilians were evacuated from danger zones, guided by soldiers who moved with an unwavering sense of duty. The combination of orbital strikes and ground operations created a safety net that the survivors had never imagined. For the first time in days, the colony's people could breathe without fear of immediate death. The invaders' desperation escalated. They deployed advanced weapons in a final attempt to repel the humans, launching concentrated attacks on the dropships and orbital positions. Explosions rocked the battlefield, lighting up the night sky and shaking the ground below. But every attack was anticipated. Human forces moved with fluid coordination, intercepting projectiles, deploying countermeasures, and striking back with precision. Each invader that survived a strike was met with another wave of lethal force. The humans' ruthlessness was not chaotic, it was controlled, systematic, and unrelenting. Amidst this chaos, the human fleet maintained flawless communication. Information about enemy movements, vulnerable positions, and threats was relayed instantly between orbit and ground teams. The Deathworlders' ability to process and act on real-time data gave them an almost supernatural advantage. The invaders were forced to fight blindly, reacting to events instead of controlling them. The humans dictated the pace, the strategy, and the outcome of the battle. By the time the invaders realized the futility of their efforts, it was already too late. On board the flagship, Hale watched the invaders crumble under the combined assault. His mind was calm, but he understood the weight of every decision. Each strike had consequences, lives were saved, but destruction was unavoidable. He accepted this as part of the mission. Humanity's interventions were never gentle. They were decisive and ruthless, designed to ensure survival at any cost. The invaders were being defeated not by chance, but by the full might of a civilization that had survived and thrived through the harshest conditions in the galaxy. The human soldiers, on the ground, moved through the colony with lethal precision. They cleared enemy-held zones, secured civilians, and neutralized threats before they could regroup. Each movement was coordinated with orbital strikes, ensuring that enemy positions were never safe. The streets were filled with the sounds of combat, the hum of energy weapons, the stomp of armored boots, and the occasional shout of soldiers giving orders. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was method, control, and efficiency. The humans acted like a single organism, each part knowing its role in the larger mission. The invaders, realizing the impossibility of victory, attempted to flee. Small groups scattered in random directions, hoping to survive the onslaught. But the humans' reach was relentless. Drones tracked the escapees, orbital artillery targeted concentration points, and ground teams intercepted those attempting to hide. There was no mercy for the invaders, no hesitation, and no room for negotiation. Every action was aimed at ending the threat decisively, ensuring that the colony would remain safe for generations to come. Civilians, witnessing the end of the battle, began to emerge from hiding. Families reunited, children ran into the arms of relieved parents, and leaders began to rebuild order from the chaos. The humans had not only defeated the invaders, they had restored hope and given the colony a chance to survive and thrive. The scale of destruction was immense, but so was the relief. For the first time in days, the colony's people could imagine a future where they were not hunted, where life could continue beyond fear and destruction. Admiral Hale knew that the battle's success would resonate across the galaxy. The invaders had underestimated humanity's ruthlessness and efficiency. Every civilization observing the battle would understand that when humans intervened, they did so with overwhelming force, precision, and determination. The message was clear. The Deathworlders did not negotiate when innocent lives were at stake. They acted decisively, ruthlessly, and without compromise. The invaders' defeat served as both a warning and a lesson in the consequences of challenging humanity. As the battle wound down, the human fleet began recovery operations. Ships repaired minor damages, soldiers regrouped, and survivors were transported to safe zones. The colony, though scarred and battered, was now secure. The invaders were either destroyed or driven into retreat, their threat neutralized. The mission had been brutal, but it had been necessary. Humanity's approach was never gentle, but it was effective, and it had saved countless lives. Hale filed his reports, detailing every engagement, every strike, and every outcome. He knew that the operation would be remembered for generations, both by the survivors of the colony and by the wider galaxy. Humans had demonstrated not only their power but their willingness to act when others would hesitate. They had intervened with decisiveness and ruthlessness, showing that their reputation as Deathworlders was well. The SOS had called, and humanity had answered with total force. The colony began to rebuild, guided by the survivors and protected by human presence until stability could be restored. The story of the ruthless strike would become legend, told and retold as an example of what happens when a civilization shaped by survival and ruthlessness chooses to intervene. It was not just a military victory, it was a moral one, a demonstration that life, no matter how distant or alien, could be defended by those willing to act without hesitation. That's Hale looked at the aftermath from orbit. He understood the scale of what had been achieved. Thousands of lives were saved, a civilization preserved, and the invaders thoroughly defeated. Yet he also knew that this was only a moment in a larger galaxy filled with danger. Humans had acted decisively here, and the legacy of their ruthlessness would echo across the stars. The Deathworlders had arrived, struck without mercy, and ensured that the SOS was not ignored. The message was unmistakable. When humans answer a call for help, they do so with overwhelming, unstoppable force. The battle was over, but the weight of what had happened hung over the colony and the humans in orbit alike. The invaders had been defeated, scattered, or destroyed, and the colony was finally safe. Yet the scars were everywhere. Buildings were reduced to rubble, streets were littered with debris, and the survivors carried the invisible wounds of fear, loss, and trauma. Children who had spent days hiding from death now wandered through destroyed neighborhoods, clinging to their parents and relatives for safety. Even in their relief, the survivors could not ignore the magnitude of what had occurred. They had been saved by a force so powerful and precise that it felt almost unreal. Admiral Hale moved through the command bridge of the flagship, observing the aftermath of the operation. He was calm, but his mind replayed every decision, every maneuver, and every strike. He knew the humans had been effective because of their training, discipline, and ruthlessness, but he also understood the emotional burden of what had been done. Each strike, each orbital bombardment, had saved lives, but it had also caused destruction. The humans did not act recklessly, yet war was never clean. Hale thought of the survivors, of the children, and of the adults who would now have to rebuild their lives in the shadow of devastation. Humanity had intervened decisively, and the consequences would linger for years. On the colony, the people were beginning to emerge from hiding in greater numbers. Survivors cautiously moved through streets that had once been dangerous, marveling at the extent to which the humans had protected them. Entire sections of the city that might have been lost were still standing, thanks to the precise targeting and strategic strikes carried out by the human fleet. The combination of orbital bombardment and ground operations had neutralized the invaders without destroying everything. For the first time in days, the survivors could see a future that was not defined by fear. The rescued civilians began to organize themselves, Community leaders emerged from the chaos, guiding survivors towards safe zones and shelters. Hospitals and medical units set up triage stations to treat the wounded. Food, water, and emergency supplies were distributed under the watchful eye of human soldiers, who coordinated with the local population to ensure order. The Deathworlders, despite their reputation for ruthlessness in battle, were meticulous in safeguarding lives after the fighting ended. Their interventions were calculated not only to defeat enemies but also to stabilize communities and protect those who had survived. As the survivors gathered and began to rebuild, they could not help but talk about the humans who had saved them. Parents recounted the awe-inspiring sight of massive ships emerging from hyperspace, of waves of precise strikes dismantling the invaders. Children described the dropships descending from orbit and the soldiers who seemed unstoppable, moving through danger with uncanny skill. The stories were filled with wonder, fear, and gratitude. For the colony, humanity was both savior and a force of power unlike anything they had known. They had been protected, yet they had witnessed a level of destruction that was terrifying in its magnitude. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, news of the operation began to spread. Observers, allies, and rivals alike took note of humanity's intervention. Some praised the humans for answering a distress call when no one else dared. They marveled at the coordination, speed, and precision that had turned what seemed an impossible situation into a decisive victory. Other civilizations, however, reacted with fear and apprehension. The ruthless efficiency displayed by the humans reminded them that Earth was a planet shaped by survival, toughness, and a willingness to act where others hesitated. Humanity's reputation as Deathworlders had been well-earned, and their actions would be remembered, respected, and feared. The invaders who had survived were left in retreat, broken and demoralized. Their defeat had been complete, a testament to the human strategic brilliance and unrelenting force. The survivors of the invading forces fled to remote regions, knowing that if they returned, they would face the full might of human retribution. The galaxy had learned a lesson when humans decided to intervene. They did so decisively, without hesitation, and with overwhelming power. The SOS had been answered, and the consequences for those who challenged humanity were now evident. On the colony, human forces worked tirelessly to secure the remaining threats. Small teams patrolled streets, searched buildings, and ensured that no pockets of resistance remained. They coordinated with local leaders to assess the needs of the population, provide assistance, and help rebuild essential infrastructure. The operation was far from over. While the battle had been won, the colony still required guidance, protection, and support. The humans understood that true victory was not measured by the enemy's defeat alone, but by the restoration of safety and hope to the lives of those they had saved. Survivors shared stories of their personal experiences during the attack. Families who had been separated were reunited, sometimes after days of frantic searching. Children recounted their fears, the sound of explosions, and the moments they thought they would never see safety again. Adults described the courage of those who had attempted to organize defenses, even when it seemed futile. The humans had not only saved lives, they had preserved the dignity and hope of a civilization under siege. The stories of the humans' arrival would be passed down through generations, becoming part of the colony's history. Hale oversaw the operation, but he also reflected on the broader implications. The galaxy was watching, and the actions of the Deathworlders would resonate far beyond this one colony. Allies would see that humans could be counted on in times of crisis. Potential adversaries would see the consequences of provoking or threatening civilizations under Earth's protection. The mission had demonstrated that humans were not only survivors but protectors, capable of decisive and ruthless action when necessary. The balance of power in the region had shifted, and everyone would remember the day humans intervened. The survivors of the colony began to take small steps toward normalcy. Children cautiously returned to their studies, elders resumed leadership roles, and workers began clearing rubble and repairing damaged buildings. The presence of human forces provided security and reassurance, allowing the colony to begin rebuilding with confidence. For many, it was the first time in weeks that life had felt stable. Even if the memories of the attack and the humans' overwhelming power remained vivid, the humans had restored not only safety but also the possibility of a future that was no longer defined by terror. In the aftermath, human commanders assessed the operation. The fleet had performed flawlessly, every strike executed with precision, every maneuver coordinated across vast distances. Losses had been minimal compared to the scale of the battle. The survivors had been rescued, and the invaders defeated. The operation had demonstrated the full capabilities of the Deathworlders' speed, ruthlessness, and coordination at a level unmatched in the galaxy. The humans had intervened decisively, proving that when the SOS of a distant civilization reached Earth, it would be answered without hesitation. Across the galaxy, analysts debated the lessons of the battle. Some spoke in admiration, marveling at humanity's combination of strategy, technology, and sheer force. Others spoke in fear, warning that the humans' willingness to act so ruthlessly made them a force that could not be challenged lightly. For the colony, the humans were heroes, saviors who had turned despair into hope. For the invaders, they were a nightmare, an unstoppable opponent whose power was absolute. The reputation of the Deathworlders had been cemented, their presence in the galaxy now synonymous with decisive intervention and ruthless efficiency. As the human fleet prepared to depart, they left behind a colony that was secure, guided and inspired by the actions of their rescuers. The survivors began rebuilding with new determination, aware that their lives had been preserved by forces beyond their understanding. The children, once paralyzed by fear, now played among the ruins with cautious optimism. Adults organized reconstruction efforts, motivated by the knowledge that they had been given a second chance. The humans had intervened and left an enduring impact that would shape the colony for generations. Admiral Hale filed his final reports and prepared the fleet for return. The operation had been a success in every measurable way, but he understood the larger truth. Humanity's intervention had consequences. The galaxy had seen the power, ruthlessness, and precision of the Deathworlders. Civilizations near and far would now view Earth with a mixture of respect and fear. Allies would know that humans could be counted on in times of dire need. Adversaries would understand that no civilization could challenge humanity lightly. The message was clear. When humans responded to a call for help, the results were absolute. As the fleet departed orbit and returned to hyperspace, the survivors of the colony looked up at the sky. The massive warships that had saved them became distant specks, but the memory of their arrival, the overwhelming force, and the protection they had provided remained vivid. The SOS had been answered, and lives had been saved. Yet the story would linger, a reminder of both the power of humans and the ruthlessness with which they could act when needed. For the colony, the future was now theirs to shape, built on the foundation of survival and hope made possible by the Deathworlders. The galaxy would remember this event for years to come. Stories of the humans' decisive intervention would spread to every corner of space, inspiring some and intimidating others. The survivors would tell their children would tell theirs, and the tale of the humans who answered an SOS with overwhelming force would become legend. Humanity had acted as protectors, warriors, and enforcers of hope, demonstrating that the Deathworlders did not hesitate, did not falter, and did not fail. Their mission had been completed, and the galaxy would never forget the day the humans arrived.